What started as a routine oversight hearing quickly turned tense after Senator Gary Peters confronted Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche over a controversial Trump executive order involving elections, a proposed federal citizenship list, and claims tied to the 2020 election. But as the hearing shifted from government oversight to federal control over elections, the exchange became a much bigger debate about public trust, state authority, and whether disproven election narratives are still shaping Justice Department policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blanche, last May, my staff at Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee released a report documenting that the inspectors general that President Trump fired had collectively uncovered billions of dollars in fraud, waste, and abuse. We oversee IGs and believe that they're incredibly important to hold government accountable, which needs to be done so that American people have trust and confidence in the work that we do here. In fact, it was quite, I thought, striking. The study showed that for every dollar that we spend on IGs, it's been estimated the return on that investment is roughly 18 times what we put into the IGs. But despite the administration's purported focus on fraud, your department FY27 request would actually cut these IGs, their budget, by nearly a third. These are folks that have an 18-to-1 return on investment. Prior to being in public service, I spent 20 plus years in the investment business. If I told investors, this is an investment I'd like you to make and you're gonna have an 18-to-1 return, they would jump out of their chair in excitement and say, absolutely, how much money can I put in to get an 18-to-1 return? So while the request, and this happens while you're requesting an increase for your overall agency through the reconciliation, so you're going to be gaining additional funding, which I would argue requires oversight as you get additional funding. That happens every government agency, not just yours. And to have a massive cut of IGs with an 18-to-1 ROI, why was that decision made, and how do you intend to have robust oversight of the department when you're cutting the folks who are responsible for that and have a brilliant track record of doing that with every administration, Democratic or Republican, before you?
So I agree the IGs are extraordinarily important. The budget that was proposed, it was developed consulting with the IGs, and so this is a budget that OMB and DOJ worked with the IG's office to come up with, and this was an agreed upon budget from them. So while not, just because you're not giving more money and you're even taking away money doesn't mean the conclusion you reach is accurate, which is that it's going to result in less work or less return on our investment. I just don't think that's true.
Well, that makes no sense, of course. If you have 1/3 fewer folks working, granted, maybe they're incredibly more productive, but it's really clear with an 18-to-1 return, investing as your budget is growing, you're going to have that kind of return, and it makes no sense to do that. Why? There's no financial sense to do it. So is there another reason you just don't want IGs on the job?
As I just said, the IGs themselves work with OMB and DOJ to develop this budget in a way that made them feel that they could get their job done.
So it wasn't like, we've got a budget for it, you can either take this or you're going to get a lot less.
I wasn't part of the conversation, but I assure you it was
not. I can't imagine IGs are going to say, okay, we want fewer of us even though we have an 18-to-1 return, and we're the guardian to make sure that people can trust what happens in federal government. And it makes no sense to me to have that cut. And I think it speaks volumes of what this administration is really focused on, and it's not about reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. You don't do that by decimating the IG Corps. We certainly saw him fire a number of IGs earlier and have serious concerns. Mr. Blanche, the President also signed an executive order on March 31 directing the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Postal Service to take a series of actions related to federal elections, including the creation of a federal citizenship list and new rules on mail ballot distribution. That order is rightly being challenged in federal court, as these are state functions. But recent reporting indicated that the implementation of that order is being coordinated through the White House meetings involving senior Department of Justice leadership, including Assistant Attorney General Harmet Dillon. So my question for you, sir, is what is the department's role in implementing the March 31st executive order?
Well, I want to be careful because it is under litigation, but it's as you just described. It's working with other agencies within the administration to implement the goals, which I think are appropriate goals, to make sure that we have free and fair elections, to make sure that those are implemented, whether it's DOJ that needs to implement them or some other federal agency.
Well, you have other agencies. The same reporting identified the official leading the Department of Homeland Security's work, as you said, you're all working together on this, who now serves as the DHS Deputy Assistant Secretary for Election Integrity. Her name is Heather Honey, who is in that position. Ms. Honey's prior claims were central to the effect to challenge the 2020 election results. Claims, as you know, have been widely disproven. It's not true, none of this stuff. She's a key player there. So my question for you, sir, is the department taking policy direction, either formally or informally? You say they are from your previous answer, but from an official whose prior work was built on disproven claims about a prior federal election?
Our policy direction comes from President Trump and his leadership team. So I know the person you're speaking about. She's part of DHS and certainly in meetings that we have about election integrity. But as far as whether myself or Harmeet Dillon take policy directions, we take them from the president.
So, interesting. A person who was part of these widely disproven false allegations, and a president who, of course, subscribes to that as well. So that's what you're telling me. That's what's driving this effort by the federal government to basically take powers that the Constitution reserves for our states. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Senator Gary Peters turned what looked like a routine oversight hearing into a much larger debate about government accountability, election control, and whether the Justice Department is becoming too political under the Trump administration. He started by focusing on inspectors general, the watchdogs inside federal agencies responsible for uncovering fraud, waste, and abuse. Peters pointed out that inspectors general previously fired under Trump had uncovered billions of dollars in misconduct and saved taxpayers huge amounts of money. Then he made a point that really stood out. According to the figures Peters cited, every dollar spent on inspectors general returns about $18 in recovered taxpayer value. That statistic mattered because Peters was trying to show that oversight is not just about politics, it is about protecting public money. His argument was simple: if oversight offices are producing massive returns for taxpayers, why would the administration cut their budgets so heavily? Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche defended the proposal by saying DOJ worked with inspectors general while developing the budget and argued that reduced funding would not necessarily reduce effectiveness. But Peters clearly was not buying that explanation. And honestly, this part of the hearing exposed a bigger issue about power and accountability. Oversight offices are often uncomfortable for administrations because they investigate mistakes, misconduct, and corruption from inside the government itself. So when budgets are cut after inspectors general have already been fired, critics naturally start wondering whether the goal is efficiency, or less scrutiny. That is exactly the concern Peters was raising. Then the hearing shifted into an even more controversial topic: elections. Peters questioned Blanche about a Trump executive order involving a proposed federal citizenship list and new rules connected to mail ballots and election administration. And this is where the hearing became much bigger than a normal budget discussion. Because elections in America are traditionally managed by states, not the federal government. That balance matters because many Americans, regardless of party, are wary of giving too much control over elections to Washington. Peters argued that the executive order is already facing legal challenges because critics believe it crosses constitutional boundaries and interferes with powers reserved for states. Blanche defended the administration by saying DOJ is working with other agencies to pursue what he described as legitimate election integrity goals and free and fair elections. But Peters pushed further by bringing up Heather Honey, a DHS official reportedly involved in election integrity discussions who was also connected to claims challenging the 2020 election results. That was a key moment because the issue stopped being just about policy and became about credibility. Peters' argument was essentially this: if people tied to disputed or disproven election claims are helping shape federal election policy, how can Americans trust the process to stay neutral? Blanche responded by saying policy direction ultimately comes from President Trump and his leadership team. And politically, that answer mattered a lot. Because it reinforced the concern that election policy is being shaped directly by a president who still disputes parts of the 2020 election outcome. That is the bigger issue underneath this hearing. This was not just a fight over one executive order or one federal database. It was a debate about who controls elections, how much power the federal government should have over voting systems, and whether Americans can still trust institutions to stay independent and nonpartisan. Peters wanted viewers to see an administration expanding federal power while weakening oversight and surrounding election policy with figures connected to controversial election claims. Blanche wanted viewers to see an administration focused on election integrity and enforcing legitimate federal priorities. But the hearing revealed something deeper than politics. It showed how fragile public trust has become around elections, government oversight, and federal institutions. Because once Americans stop trusting the fairness of elections or the independence of oversight agencies, every political fight becomes more dangerous and every institution becomes harder for the public to believe in. That is why this hearing mattered far beyond the committee room. Subscribe to Capitol Breakdown HQ for more Senate and House hearing breakdowns, political analysis, and accountability-focused coverage from Washington.